Patrick. Welcome to this Never Done Before live festival, workshops, work, podcast episode, experiment.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for being the first to jump on this call. And since we don't know how long this will last and what it will become, let's start at the beginning, as every episode. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
That's a really good question. I think for now, I would say I'm still at the baby steps of facilitating, but I wasn't aware of like full-time facilitating in that sense until maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So I started first by here in the Philippines, we have this youth program for millennials, which is basically just a voluntary extracurricular thing that for people to talk about life relevant topics such as marriage, spirituality, career. And so I participated in this program because the format was case study, small group discussions. We were given a particular case. Someone would facilitate a discussion around that case and around the topic, say marriage. And then we would just talk about stuff related to the case and the topic. And I like going through that program. I volunteered my first time to be a facilitator was when I volunteered to be part of this program, which is Life Endeavors and Projects, or LEAP, as it's called here in the Philippines. And I had the opportunity to facilitate conversations around different people, diverse perspectives. So one example I can give is we were talking about a case on spirituality and transcendence. And although to be transparent, I do come from a Catholic background, and we do have these beliefs about that. What was interesting about this conversation was actually tended towards things outside of my religion. So we actually talked about Taoism. We actually talked about other religions outside of here in the Philippines, because we're a predominantly Catholic religion. So yes,
and
you have a question.
I would be curious when I hear you speaking, where do you see the difference between facilitation and moderation of a conversation?
That's a very good question. I think in that program, the role that was called for that role to lead the discussion was facilitator. So, but I think now that you talked about the term moderator, I think maybe my role now is more of a moderator in that sense, because we had some questions that we kind of prepared in advance, which a moderator does. And I think that a lot of the function I was doing in those conversations was really to moderate what people were talking and to actually bring it back to the topic that we were discussing. And somehow I think that moderating might not be the same as facilitating. I would say moderating is probably a bit more prepared in terms of your getting ready for the conversation, because moderators do talk to the people they will converse with in advance. Whereas facilitating, I think, has a bit more of an ambiguous aspect to it. Maybe I am by no means an expert on facilitation, but having said that, in even my experience right now in the Never Done Before Festival, a lot of it is very ambiguous in a good way. Ambiguous because I don't know what's going to happen in the workshops. I don't know the people I'm meeting. And yet I think the thing about facilitation compared to moderation is there's more of a discovery aspect. for facilitation.
Mm.
And you could perhaps let me know your thoughts about that. But I think facilitation, if you have an idea, it ends up changing in terms of like results or what you expected in the conversation. I think that's somehow the difference I've seen so far with moderating versus facilitating.
Mm.
So
what comes to my mind is yes, you're coming out of Rebecca Southern's workshop on nimble facilitation, right?
yes.
Which is maybe the extreme of emergent facilitation and being ready for whatever happens. What also comes to my mind is actually the difference in facilitation depending on the workshop. So for instance, if I'm hired by a client for a team workshop, then I would have conversations with each and every participant beforehand. So it's highly prepared, maybe even more prepared than a conversation that I would moderate. If I host a workshop for the community, for instance, or for which I would sell tickets on the B2C market, then I don't know who's showing up. So this requires a different form of facilitation.
I'm curious, Miriam, if I might return the question back to you. How do you see facilitation versus moderation?
I almost said good question, but then I would say this to myself, right? For me, facilitation is the design of a longer conversation to get a group from a moment of maybe confusion or unclarity to action,
Mm-hmm.
to make it easy to go through the conversation, and there is some sort of an expected outcome.
Yes.
So we have a purpose, which is basically the result of a conversation, whereas moderation is the moderation of a conversation where the goal is the process. So the goal is the exchange on a different topic, but maybe not necessarily to agree or take a decision always to have a specific outcome. And I'm thinking out loud.
Interesting. I like the difference you say with facilitation and moderation, because I think a lot about moderation is the format, who you invite and what are talked about in that conversation. But I think facilitation, on the other hand, you have this outcome, but the mindset of a facilitator is sometimes you have to make room for things to the unexpected, I would say. So, and this is what I actually took from my workshop with that workshop I attended with Rebecca Southerns, is that the unexpected always comes as a surprise, but it's up to you, the mindset that you come with meeting that unexpected is what is important. And Rebecca faced a particular client situation recently that had her really unprepared and annoyed a lot of the time, but she had a lot of grace in carrying that conversation and commitment to still follow through. And I admire her about that, because she understands her role as a facilitator. And this is something also that Viren Thakrar mentioned in his input to Rebecca, is that the role of a facilitator to be thrust or to be parachuted into this ambiguity that we did not prepare for, we did not sign up for, and yet it's there. And somehow, maybe that's part of the role of a facilitator. Maybe some people say, yes, that's just really part of the job, but it makes it worth it.
It's interesting. And then, yeah, good that you mentioned that. It really shows the mindset of a facilitator and how we approach things, and it reminds me of the concept of the growth mindset, or the beginner's mindset. So in such a situation, you can be grateful. Oh, what a learning opportunity, a fantastic growth opportunity. Or you can say, oh no, I didn't sign up for that. We need to reschedule and please close that. And I think leaning into this uncertainty with a growth mindset, with curiosity,
Right.
is really
And
helpful for ourselves as facilitator, but also for the group, just to explore what is it that we need right now.
And if I can just once again echo Miriam, I did mention this during Thomas's workshop, but I think I liked the conversation we had with Mary Alice Arthur and that sweet spot between chaos and order. And I think somehow facilitation happens in that little sliver between order and chaos. And I think that is where growth happens. You know, if things are too orderly, there's no innovation, there's no opportunity to be creative. But if things are too chaotic, then you also have this feeling of fear of that you have no control, and therefore you lose your sense of autonomy as well. So if you are in the middle, then I think that produces a healthy, shall we say, the ingredients you need to be able to get creative as a facilitator.
Very true.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing that up. So now that you mentioned your learnings from 3 Never Done Before workshops, I'd be curious, what is, when you look back at your experience of being a facilitator, moderator, what's been your kind of learning that you would like to share with someone?
Good question. I think that I've only had like few experiences with facilitation so far, but I would say that it's really good to see facilitation as co-creation. So what I mean by that is, I'll just give an example. Prior to where I'm currently working, which is Insight Pact, it's a company that does a lot of facilitation. I came up with the idea of having a book club or a movie club among my friends here in the Philippines. And that was kind of like my informal way of, hey, it's the pandemic, let's have productive conversations, let's do something different. And little did I expect that I would probably jump in again somehow. Maybe I wouldn't know if it was facilitator, moderator, but I was actually inviting people to watch certain movies and for us to actually talk about what struck us about these movies. So we talked about 1984, and we also talked about real silly movies like When Harry Met Sally. So yes, and it's very interesting that I come prepared with some questions, for these kinds of conversations, but you get pleasantly surprised that people see things differently, and somehow there's a struggle of, do we talk about this, or do we let people have control, or do we let people actually co-determine where this conversation is going? And somehow I found that there was better results with getting people to be part of that conversation. So in this case, like they were also asking their own questions, and so my friends who were participating in these kinds of sessions actually in some way indirectly became facilitators themselves. My definition of facilitator here, meaning they ask a question and they are just actually feeding off each other's questions. And so it's very cool to see my friends move from answering my questions to them having their own questions. And somehow when they get into that role from participant to facilitator, I think that's great, because a conversation happens that as I said, you're co-creating with them something that you didn't expect you had planned for. And somehow I think that's what would be my, I would say, gift to people who want to learn about facilitation at the whatever point they are in their life.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's beautiful on many levels. One is that it shows, or it exemplifies what you described, what you learned from Mary Alice Arthur about the ground between order and chaos. So you provide order by preparing the session and bringing in questions, and then the chaos happens as soon as group dynamics come in.
Yes.
And it shows to me also the role of the facilitator, that is to hold the space. And I think that's a concept. When I started with a podcast, I always heard holding space, holding space. What does that mean? But actually, it's exactly that. It's coming in with a question with a kind of structure, and then making sure that everyone feels safe enough to jump
Absolutely.
in and also facilitate a little bit. And I think if you say that you're a beginner's facilitator and already you can create the space and make the empower the others to facilitate, that's beautiful. That's,
Yeah, it is.
you're on the right track.
Thank you. And that's why I also love the community so far in Never Done Before. I think there's this whole concept that, hey, I'm not just a fellow participant, I'm a fellow creator of the experience, because what happens in the Never Done Before Festival is actually what each individual person is bringing to the table. And therefore, what will come up after this 24 hours is just actually everyone's little decisions and choices and activities that make up this great universe of stories, I would say.
Yes.
I love your emoticon.
Yeah, and the beauty, and that's also a reason why we call those who contribute a workshop, we call them contributors and not facilitators, because we're all facilitators. So there are some amongst us who contribute a workshop, but in the workshop, everyone is a facilitator. So we're all here to learn and to co-create.
Absolutely.
So thank you for co-creating this podcast episode with me, Patrick.
You're welcome. And thank you for inviting me to drop by the lake.
Yes. And maybe you come again later with to share some further learnings with me and the audience.
Sure. I thank you also, and keep up the good work, I would say.
Thank you. So, welcome to the show on the Never Done Before podcast bench. You're joining from South Africa.
That's right.
5 a.m. in the morning almost.
Yeah.
And I would be very curious about your experience. How do you see the online space facilitating conversations?
It's an interesting one because it keeps on changing. My first response to it was, this is exciting. There's so many opportunities. There's so many more conversations we can have. We can have conversations with people who are further away. But then I realized that the underlying dynamic of conversations in the online space is actually quite different. And I actually got to see that first as part of our podcast. And as much as it's different than a kind of a completely open, free social conversation, I kind of saw how people were reacting to a space that they were unfamiliar with themselves, and they were going through the whole cycle of struggling to connect, struggling to sense make, struggling to find their own contribution to the conversation, struggling with not having an after conversation. So what, in the physical space, once you have a conversation, you'll either agree to meet again, or you'll agree to connect in other ways. And that's not always easy. In the online space, you kind of press the leave button and you switch off and go somewhere else, to another meeting, to another conversation. And so I kind of saw people, including myself, going through that learning process. And I guess where I am at the moment is it's another option. It's useful. In some cases, it's vital to have certain conversations which are difficult to have otherwise. The anonymity, for example, that online space can provide if structured in a certain way. That helps. But there's so much we're missing in just having the online conversation. There's so much that happens in the internal conversation that we have while we have the virtual conversation or the online conversation rather. And I must say that in a way I miss the kind of the depth, the serendipity, the synchronous connections that are still easier for us humans to do in the physical space. So it's almost like it's another option. It's good to know, it's good to have, and in some cases it's the right first choice. But I think it made me appreciate even more the human connections we have, even more when we actually meet. We actually make the point of meeting in a physical space.
And I would be very curious about your experience then of the festival that we're having right now, where you could have these serendipitous conversations. Like right now, we met on the bench. It wasn't planned, it wasn't in our schedules, and still it's happening. And once we finish this conversation on Zoom, we'll be back in a different space where we can either continue the conversation or meet again. So I wonder to what extent what you just described, this longing for serendipity, actually made us maybe more creative in coming up with tools that make it possible.
No, very much. I kind of see it as there's almost like two spaces here. There's the creative space in which we're faced with a challenge, and we need to find new ways of connecting. And that's what the last year and a half or so has done significantly for us. I don't think we would have ended up with so many of these online solutions, so many of these online spaces, so many of these experiments at scale to connect like we're having now, which is great. At the same time, if I kind of just jump from that first box to the next, it also becomes the precursor to many in-person conversations. So for me, when I have the online conversation, the first thing that comes to mind for me once we have the connection, once we speak about something that matters, is I'd love to have that offline conversation with that person. It's almost like it gave me a window to meet people I wouldn't have met otherwise, to have conversations I probably wouldn't have, certainly not at that scale. But then you want more. Then there are people who say, I'm really curious about this person. And that's when the online conversation generally I find very often kind of runs its course. And you want to now have a deeper conversation with the person. So for me, it's that hybrid and knowing when to jump from the one to the other. What the online environment is great at, what it gives us scale at, but also knowing that it's not a kind of a forced solution for everything. It's kind of, okay, so what's next? I mean, I was in the workshop with Chris earlier, with Chris Bent, learning how to draw. That was a terrifying and an exciting experience all in one. So I'm really glad I was there. But it kind of made me want to jump on a call with Chris, or even ideally, when possible, to have a real face-to-face coffee conversation with him. Because we've made connections that we wouldn't have made otherwise. But not all of them are now suitable for another online conversation. So that's kind of what my impression has been.
That's very true. It's very true, and still I wonder, because maybe it's also a matter of preference, or of and I wonder what it is to be in the same physical space together and what the real difference actually is.
Because that changes as well, right? It's not the same as what it was 2 or 3 years ago.
Exactly. And I must say, if I'm social distancing with people in the same physical space or wearing face masks, then I prefer to see someone through the screen because I feel closer and it's so much more intimate. Also the beauty of a breakout session where nobody listens. It's just the two of us here. Well, and some audience, but they will only listen to the conversation later on.
You know, if I could build on that for a moment, I was reading this this article by a UK-based economist who was talking about how we kind of almost focus too much on the short term, how we don't always see the repercussions of the decisions that we make now. Now, I'm not an economist myself, and you can kind of lose yourself a little bit in this technical analysis of what's coming. It's a bit ominous. But what really got me was, you know, if we have the possibility of interacting with less constraints, with no face mask, etc., in the now, it becomes even more powerful once we can then look at the long term. So we can ask, okay, so we've had this festival now, or we're having this festival now, right? It kind of, my mind kind of casts itself into, so what would a never done before festival look like 3 years from now? And it could look very different, right? It could look completely different than what it is now. It's almost like your first reaction is almost like, wow, this is almost too much to imagine, right? But this is, I think, what our ability to be present in the now and to go through this experiment really, and be able to connect with one another in the online space, but then also recognizing that you know, this mass experimentation could get us somewhere very different 3 years from now, 5 years from now. Imagine 10 years from now what it could do. And that's where I'm starting to think about, you know, what apologies, that was my morning alarm clock. You know, it gets me to start to think about the possibilities of what it could be, when we're not, when, you know, beyond the now moment. For example, you know, what would a regional never done before look like? What would a never done before with a theme that resonates deeply for people in a certain locality look like? You know, it's almost like thinking of what the original TED Talk concept looked like, and then the TEDx looked like. It was very different, right? The topic of conversations were different. The people who spoke, the mix of people was different, and that gets me excited.
And it's so funny. I can almost link our conversation now with the conversation that I had with Patrick before that you didn't listen to. Yes. But it was this the space between order and chaos, and how much can we actually plan things to happen, and that this is the actual facilitation superpower. So I was thinking while you were speaking about this facilitation tool, the how might we? So how might we imagine or realize a never done before in 3 years from now?
Yes.
And how to design such a conversation to co-create this vision together. And then also allowing things to happen that we cannot plan. So just as you explained, okay, so TED had a vision. There was a vision behind TED, and then TEDx happened. And I'm sure that nobody ever thought of this impact.
But we're richer for it, right? I wouldn't have met certain people if I didn't start to listen to TEDx talks, for example, if I kept to the original format. Many of the people who were there in that original format were even further away. They were, on the other side of the planet. They were, almost. My sense was less accessible then. And then you started seeing people who were more in your locality, people that were more within reach. So I think it added to it. It made it richer. It didn't replace it.
Democratized almost, democratized knowledge sharing and the exchange, and brought us maybe closer together. That yes, you do have the big names who are on the TED stage, but maybe even smaller names can be big names.
Yes,
And
I like that.
inspire a big audience. And that's also what I love then about the online format. It democratizes, it makes it so much more accessible for everyone.
Yes, that's right. I didn't ask you a question. Sorry, this two podcasters on the same call. It can be a dangerous thing. What are you most excited about today's festival?
It is really I am very curious, kind of in a way curious that it makes my heart jump of what there is to emerge.
Yes.
So what is happening between everything that is scheduled? Like this podcast recording, this podcast bench was an idea that I had literally 6 hours ago. Was lying in my bed trying to sleep between 7:30 p.m. and 11 p.m. before starting the festival. This could be something to do. And now that everyone is kind of starting to join Velo, although they maybe didn't want to and they felt reluctant, and suddenly things start to happen. We're just sitting in at the reception desk with the Philippines and Australia and the Netherlands. And now I'm sitting here with South Africa, and there's so much potential that we cannot control.
That's right.
So I think this is what I'm most curious about, just to see what emerges out of that. Nice. And also over we kicked off with Jacques, the party scientist, and Patrick. But he guided us through a party. Were you there? I haven't seen, maybe not.
No.
So it was a party without music, and we were stretching, and he would put people in the spotlight, and it was embarrassing, and it was so much fun. And this vulnerability that we shared, vulnerability through total shame, kind of already brought us closer together. So I'm very curious to see how the energy will be in 20 hours from now.
Yes. Well, I'm sure lots of coffee cups ahead, huh?
And how this podcast will evolve, whether it's going to be at the end 2 hours, 3 hours, maybe 15 hours. I don't know.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, I'm really glad you've put this together. I'm sure it changed format, content, collaborations many times over before it got to today. So it's wonderful to see it kind of come together. It really is.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. Last question. When you think back of your facilitation experience, what is the one thing that you would share about facilitation and your learnings with an audience?
Yeah, for me, it's and it's something we speak about often, about kind of that off-script moment. It's waiting for and looking out for that magic moment when the facilitator is not the facilitator anymore, where the door opens and you're having a very different conversation, and the kind of, and keeping aware that you shouldn't step into being the facilitator at that time. That almost in that segment, your job is done. they are now having the conversation they were so yearning for. They're having the conversation that they were so waiting for which they had so many conversations with you and trying to hint at and trigger and bring others into the conversation so we can have it. And at the least expected moment, it happened, and the conversation shifts into something that they are, I guess, similar to today's festival, in this co-creative, unrestricted space. And remembering that at that moment, you're privileged to be there, but not as the facilitator. Because then you constrain the conversation. It's almost being able to take that hat, that label off, and that, as much as we remind ourselves as facilitators that, we're there to enable their conversation, the felt experience of it is very different. And when that happens, when you recognize that, to allow yourself to completely disappear, and to let them have that incredible value conversation that they couldn't have had otherwise. That probably, I find, as a facilitator, that's the greatest contribution that I could make to that conversation.
Indeed, indeed. Stepping back and just holding the space for them to have the conversation. And Sar, I think if you're listening back to our conversation on the podcast, you will laugh out loud, because this is a perfect kind of continuation of the conversation I had before that you didn't hear. Magic. Yes. Thank you so much.
To be continued. I'm sure we'll see you again over the day. Okay.
Hot take anytime.
Jeremy, welcome to this experimental podcast recording room. You just hosted your Never Done Before workshop, the Slow Thinking Dojo. What did you learn? What did you experiment with?
Oh, man. So we experimented with Platonic dialogues and trying to get this magic that is slow thinking. There is a possibility space that exists when I can really plug my brain deeply into your brain, and your thinking becomes my thinking and my thinking becomes your thinking, so that when they're really enmeshed, that we're both sort of outside of ourselves and together in this very weird sort of special, almost magical way. So that's what we were trying to see if we could get spark. And it's always a little bit of a, well, is it going to work? Will it take fire? Right? It just kind of has to happen.
Did it take fire?
Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of things that came up in the debrief that make me think, there was definitely very interesting facets of it. There's two challenges, right? There's the challenge that I can provide structure or space, a context. I can set a vibe that people can sort of drop into and pick up. And then there is the element of are you going to go for it? Because if you're going to go for it and I'm going to go for it, then something can happen, but it might not. Right?
And with you going to go for it, do you mean the participants accepting the invitation that you're making, or is it you as a facilitator having second doubts, being scared of your own courage and not going?
No, it's really about the participants. Are they going to, so what we're looking for is this thing that this dude John Vervaeke refers to as the dialogos, the logos, right? We're looking for this life that the conversation sort of takes on, right? In which it is that it is greater than the sum of its parts, right? And there like I said, it requires a personal willingness to really extend beyond the limitations of myself, not even my comfort zone, but actually the bounds of what I think and where I start and end. I actually have to transcend.
So what was the structure that you designed for that? What was your invitation to the participants?
Yeah, so I read the manifesto for slow thinking, right? That we're I feel like totally on the spot, so I'm going to look at it, right? But that we're trying to figure out a way of how to do all of that stuff, right? So the manifesto for slow thinking, Karen's thing, that we appreciate the value of questions before answers, observations before evaluations, change of perspective before point of view, self-reflection before criticism, right? Awesome, super, make me personally happy propositions, the set of ideas. I look at that and go, yes, I agree. But what does it mean? How do you actually do that, right? So we wanted to create a procedure that gives guidelines that allows people to actually enact these propositions, and then also enable them to reflect about what it's like in those propositions, in that embodiment, and sharing perspectives about what it's like as we're all in it together makes it a very participatory experience. So we're really trying to like dwell into the manifesto through this Platonic dialogue.
So you designed small experiences, exercises for the participants to do in breakouts, or?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I have to give credit where credit is due. I stole most of this workshop, actually, like quite shamelessly, from Guy Sengstock and John Vervaeke. So we started off with circling. So an exercise of this authentic relating game that is all about noticing. So just with the simplest prompt in pairs, being here with you, I feel. And hearing that, I feel, right? And just going around and around and seeing what happens as I reveal myself and my thinking, and how does that affect you and as my counterpart? What sort of takes place in that revealing and that mutual opening? And then we built on that stack with the addition of sort of trying to dwell into each other's perspective. So we added on, being here with you, I feel, and hearing that I feel. And I imagine that you, so what might be your response to this thing that I'm offering you? Just trying to get into each other's vibe and into each other's space. And then we added a reflection on top of that. So what I heard you say was, and what I'm also picking up that you maybe didn't say was, right? So we can start to then really build generatively on the thoughts and input of each other. And then we took that circling experience, right? This opportunity to get into each other's space into an exercise called philosophical fellowship, where I offered them a text and they read through the text, picked a particularly salient line, and then started to chant that line going around the circle, right? And then trying to get into the vibe or the mode of the author, the sage in this instance, and then building on it one line at a time. So then they would go around the circle and offer one line that would sort of fit and mesh into the text from the voice of the sage, the author. And then, a couple more lines. And, before we know it, we're sort of hopefully, with luck, fingers crossed, we're in the vibe of the author together, and we're expanding the space and the insight of this, this profound text, so to speak.
What surprised you?
What surprised me
From a
is,
facilitation perspective.
yeah, I mean, this isn't particularly surprising from a facilitation perspective, but how much I wanted to jump into the process, right? How much I really wanted to participate. The groups were even, there was no need for me to participate, so I chilled out. And yet, there's all types of like juicy insights being manufactured in these groups. Like, so I, and of course, I crammed the time so full that, in the debrief, I'm like, tell me, what were you guys talking about? Tell me some of the brilliant things that came up in this space in between all of you.
Nice. And if there was one insight that you would like to share that you have learned from all your years of facilitating, what would that be?
So what's very alive for me right now is this mode of shared thinking that, what the world needs now is more shared thinking, right? If there's going to be something that gives us the possibility of saving the planet and maybe doing things in this dramatically different fashion, which I think we all sort of yearn for, it is very probably going to have something to do with my ability to really get into a much more generative space with other people. And so how can I help people practice that skill so that they are more familiar with it? Because it's definitely has something to do with how familiar I am with that mode, and then the context. So can the context support people's personal skillfulness? So what I would say is practice, man. If there's something that you want to figure out how to do, practice. Find opportunities and collaborators to scheme and get your reps in.
Thank you for sharing that. And before you go, what I hear is that one of the things to practice and the core essence of the practice is listening.
Totally.
At the same time, when I hear shared thinking, it almost sounds like synchronizing thinking. And then I wonder, how do we then get this diversity in and this critical dialogue that we need in order to solve today's complex problems?
Yeah. So synchronized. I notice I have a reaction to this idea of synchronization, because on one hand, I recognize it because I definitely have this sense of like hearing what is actively like in the corners of my mind sort of being chewed on. Somebody else spits it out in a way that was way clearer than was in my brain. So there is a sort of like, these things are meshing, they're coming together. But I don't have a sense that we are, that there is uniformity in that, right? So there is unity for sure, but there is also like pockets of density. And I may have a particular pocket of density, something may be clearer for me than it is for you, and vice versa. And so it's in basically, there's a way to work together so that I'm only bringing in the part that is really clear for me, and then I'm giving it to you to voice the part that's very clear for you, so that nobody's doing too much work individually.
It sounds like the division of labor, but for thinking.
Yeah, basically, right? So how do I know that I'm doing more than my fair share? Like, and that is a part of it.
I am intrigued.
We'll come to the next dojo session. As a matter of fact, Miriam, right? The Think Slow Dojo will be residing in the Never Done Before community, right?
Hopefully in our greenhouse.
Yeah, so we'll be trying a whole bunch of, we'll be seeing how the practice takes in this community, and see what happens. See if we can share shared thinking.
Yes, to be found out. Hello, Jakob. I just threw you now into the cold water. Welcome to the experimental podcast recording.
Hi, Miriam. Yeah, this is really cold water. I just had my first session on the festival and saw you at this place on the Wheelo map, and I thought I'd drop by and say hello, and now we're podcasting. This is so
Awesome.
great. Yeah.
Awesome. So what is the one facilitation advice or insight, let's call it insight, that you would share with the audience?
Phew, this is a really hard question. The one facilitation insight. I don't believe there's one, because there's so many, because we do some facilitation trainings for new facilitators, and yesterday I had a training, and I noticed when I was talking with the participants about brain writing instead of brainstorming. And I think for us as facilitators, it's kind of so normal. It's not a new thing. And I was just explaining them the concepts behind brainstorming versus brain writing. What does it mean to get more ideas from the people, to get the ideas from the people who don't speak up if you do a brainstorming. And we are doing this exercising of brain writing and then a silent sorting. And I was just watching them and doing this on the whiteboard. And after the exercise, they reflected me, they got it. Okay, now they understand it. The magic of what we did in 7 minutes with a group of 10 people, sharing ideas, sharing experiences, sorting them, clustering them, doing this in silence. And they didn't do this before. And we had before a little bit the topic of where you can do brain writings. And I say you can do everywhere brain writings, in the chat, in Menti, in a collaborative document, in a whiteboard, even on a paper in front of your table. So I think for me, it was yesterday again, the feeling that how important it is to tell people to brain write instead of brainstorm.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. And congratulations for coming up with something so deep in without any warning.
Thank you for the question. So what's your one insight you like to share? And before you answer, I'll give you some time to answer. I just want to say, this is so incredible. I'm going through this map. I'm reading every manual. This is unbelievable. I just found the library with the books. It's really honestly the best virtual space I've ever entered. This is so lovely in every detail. I was in the balloon, and this is amazing, Miriam, what you create with the team here. And this is fantastic, really. I'm deeply touched about it.
Thank you, Jakob. Thank you. And maybe this brings me to my facilitation insight. It's care. If we design the conversations for our participants with care, caring for the group instead of for ourselves, it will lead to insights and authenticity. Just leave the mask at the table. And I think this was, for me, such a touching moment this morning last night for the opening. I came to realize that Never Done Before it's not a gala dinner, it's a family dinner. It's like you open the door like, oh, Jakob, great, you're there. Sorry, I'm not done yet. I didn't put my makeup on. So why don't you leave the wine here, put the present there, and could you just wash the dishes before coming to dinner? It's kind of embracing whatever is there, jumping in and co-creating it together instead of the polished version. And I tend to believe that we feel if we're welcomed with care and if it was designed and prepared with care.
Yeah, that's it. You can really feel that. So I jumped into a session now. I was talking not in my native language in a facilitation clinic about my case with people I have never seen before. And the host, Amaranto, I think was his name, Amarato, was doing a really good job. The group was doing a great job, feeling safe and comfortable. And this was surrounded by this space, like feeling welcomed, and it's felt really like the metaphor of a family dinner. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, Amaranato, he has real superpowers in terms of coaching.
Yeah.
And before I let you go to prepare your own Never Done Before workshop, the second one, what is for you how do you come up with the Never Done Before workshop idea? What is the magic sauce? Where do you find your inspiration?
This was a good one, because I was asking myself, how did I find the topic of boredom? And I'm preparing this workshop. I'm asking, why did this come up to my mind? So honestly, I don't know. I think we had a conversation or an email or something about, and I'm really trying to think about this, what was never done before. I think for me that it's a title. This is really motivating me to explore new areas. And I think the connection was, I have made so many workshops and so many joyful workshops and exciting workshops and with a lot of energy. Then I think the twist of, okay, how would we do a workshop about boredom, or which could feel boring? And then it developed, and that was kind of the twist. So this Never Done Before is really motivating me, because I want to explore the new fields and do something. I developed, I think, 3, 4, 5 new exercises for the workshop. And honestly, I totally don't know how this will work. The last one is really, you can hate me. Perhaps people hate me afterwards. So I was telling this to my friends, and I just want to share a little story about at breakfast today. I told my daughter, I'm today at a festival, a virtual festival about my work. And I'm working with a group, and she's 8 years old. And I'm doing kind of a group work with them. And she was, Dad, and what is it about? And I would say, it's about boredom. And she, oh, Dad, why do you do something about boredom? Do something about games or having fun or something. And I was like, oh, this is so good, because kids are reacting to the word of boredom or boring so honestly. Oh no, boredom is so boring. So I don't know how the people react in the workshop later.
I'm very curious, and I hope that maybe you're going to repeat it during the afterglow.
What's the afterglow?
Afterglow is basically the extension of Never Done Before, because there's so much FOMO, fear of missing out, going on in the 24 hours, that it was born last year out of we called it Aftermath last year. When
Okay.
Never Done Before was over, everyone was like, oh, and what are we doing now? And then someone, I think it was Martin, who came up with, why don't we have an advent calendar of one workshop every day between the 1st and the 24th of December? And then we invited the workshop hosts to redo their workshops throughout December as a kind of afterglow Glow program.
Oh, okay, wow, sounds nice. Let's talk after the workshop. If it's just, if anyone would like to do this again or not, we'll see.
I might sneak into your debriefing just to hear. Enjoy.
Yeah.
I wish you fun. Can I wish you fun for a boring workshop? I wish you insights.
Yeah, insights. Yeah.
Maybe afterwards you come back here to the podcast room and tell us about it.
Yeah, we can do this. And Miriam, I wish you a lot of energy to stay the whole time awake. Because do you have been awake the whole night?
I had breakfast at 11 p.m. and I had lunch at 6:30 a.m. So it's almost time for dinner at 12 noon.
Wow, this is really impressive.
Let's see. We talk in a few hours.
But you're still looking good. So everything, you're looking fresh and everything is fine.
Great. Talk to you later. Thank you for
Bye.
joining. Hello, Dove.
Hello.
Welcome to the experimental podcast recording bench.
It's it's a lovely bench.
And you just came out of your own Never Done Before workshop together with Amaranato. What did you learn?
I learned to trust emergence.
What does that mean?
Yeah, what it means is that especially in workshops in this format, which I have to, first of all, do you mind if I give you a few compliments?
Not at all, if you don't mind sharing it with the entire audience.
I don't know how big the audience is, but I don't mind. I think you've created a very generous platform in the sense of embracing and inviting learning with the low cost of failure. So, because a lot of times we are so afraid to fail that we don't grow. We don't try things that we didn't plan or test or run through. And as we don't do that, we don't learn. And which is natural because a lot of times our livelihood depends on success, right? Not on learning, on our learning. It depends on how do we facilitate the learning of others.
And it depends on status. And for both, learning and testing and experimenting are in a way.
So this compliment comes in the context of being able to run a workshop for me, which has totally open boundaries. So I know Amaranato, and so we connect to each other and we align some intentions for the workshop and some basic Lego bricks, if you want, basic things that we have in our disposal. But the idea was really to see who comes and see what happens. Okay. And not only this, in the description of the workshop, as I didn't remember, I also said that we'll explore Tai Chi. Okay. And as the people gathered, not a lot, but a good size, someone said that they're curious to see how we will explore Tai Chi, which made me think, so how the hell will we explore Tai Chi? And we ran a few exercises. What?
Facilitation on your feet.
Yeah, not on my, no, so it was sitting down. And so we created 2 or even 3 exercises that are inspired by Tai Chi. And it was wonderful. And so part of the learning, not only for me, but also for the group, is how can we put stress on this physical aspect? You know, this is the manifestation of talking heads, right? So what we see here are heads, and what we do here is talking. And all the aspect of the moving body is totally gone in this space unless we find a way to bring it back. So what happened is that we found how to bring it back. Now I can show you if you want. Do you want to do it?
Sure.
So, but we'll have to also. So here is my hand. Okay, so we'll do an exercise called sticking hands. Mm-hmm. Very easy. Sticking hands you do by someone being the driver, let's say, and someone else putting their hand on the hand of the other, so it touches only on the skin level. So the skin muscle bone only on the skin level. And now the person who drives keeps their eyes open, the other one closes their eyes, and the person who drives starts moving the hand, and the other one has to not lose the hand, but not rely on it, so be like a butterfly. And we did this in Zoom with eyes open. So like if I have my hand here, your role now is to stick to my hand with no intention of your own. Okay, and it's not a win-lose game. Just try to.
Funny with the mirroring.
Yeah, but you don't have to look at yourself. You just have to look at me. Okay, so this was the first exercise. We did it for a little longer. Second one was now with two hands. One, I drive you, and one, you drive me. So you look at the hand. Let's do this. So this is the hand I drive. Okay, so show me the hand that you drive with. Okay, and with the hand that you don't drive, you follow the driving hand of the other. Okay, while so now there's a split in you of one inventing, right, creating, and one listening, following, and see if you can integrate these two together. Okay, so that's the second one. And we did another one where, so now that we do this, and we do this as a group. Okay, so and as a group, I tell everyone to just put high view, or perhaps zoom on someone, on one person who will be your driver, and that's it. So it's a random selection. You don't know who follows you, right? And what we did at the end, and that was interesting as well, is now after we got this and there's some sort of energy there, now slowly close your eyes and keep that energy, and move one hand as though you're its driver, and the other one, just let it go as if you're following someone. And now when we do this with eyes closed for a minute or two, now slowly open your eyes and join the dance of everyone. Okay, so that was the spontaneous co-creation that comes out of not preparing, if you want. Okay, so yeah, that was really interesting, and I don't have a lot of chances to explore stuff like that, to a space where it's totally open and the team agrees to play along and see what happens.
And thank you for sharing that. And I think funny enough, this is also the reason why this entire Never Done Before exists, because for myself, I was missing the space, and I wouldn't dare to just experiment if it wasn't for a community or with a community. So I basically created the space that I would wish for myself. And I'm curious what you learn from this exercise on a more meta level of facilitation. So is it the synchronization that despite having the physical distance, we can synchronize with each other and find this flow together?
Yeah, so what I described was not the main course of the workshop. In fact, the comment that I got from people is that it wasn't a workshop. It was more of a discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And the topic of the discussion was the Book of Tao.
Mm-hmm.
And the context of Taoism that we brought to the table is how do we unite, how do we create this oneness? So these exercises are intended to connect, are intended to break this me, and
Mm-hmm.
create a we-ness, to create
Mm-hmm. And now even more curious, what is the difference for you, and what do you think is the difference for the group between a discussion and a workshop?
Yeah. So the way someone described it there is, I spent more time listening than doing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's for me. By the way, for me it was a workshop in the sense it's mental work, right? It's work of reflecting, of listening. There's no clear agenda. The agenda is co-created. We decide where we go next. But and this is like we talked once about the dynamics of meetings, right? As we have only one voice and we have a lot of participants, we spend more time listening than speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Unless we structure our workshop in a totally different way, like breakout rooms or individual work, like silent workshop, as we won't do it this time, but as you experimented. For me, the boundaries are not that clear, but that was the I don't know if it's complaint or not, but that was the claim. That I expected to be more active and to talk, to do more. And I spend a lot of time listening to others, listening to you.
Thank you for sharing that.
By the way, I had just one thought. I had my workshop was on Zoom, and I plan to do it on Miro, on Willow. And what I plan to do in Miro is first to talk with people about mindfully choosing where they sit and saying hello to the neighbor by chat. No, so because I think the physical aspect of we talked about talking heads versus moving bodies. The understanding of where you are and who are your neighbors is something that we can explore in this workshop, even if after that we forget about it. Just to know that I'm sitting near someone.
And I think it is a very important aspect, this turn to your neighbor moment. And we tend to forget how important it is once we join an online workshop. And that's why I always insist on the one-on-one check-in capsule. And whatever I do, turn to your neighbor, say hello. Who are you? Why are you here? And then we can start. If you were to give if you would share one insight about facilitation, that you have learned over the past years? What would that be?
Yeah, so I can show you one sentence that popped in my mind when I was in the workshop of Amma. It was right before mine. It's not our workshop. It's the workshop of the people that are there. And can I treat myself as a chair? You know, a chair is a facilitator, a table is a facilitator. I don't want to take more responsibility than a chair does.
Beautiful.
Does it make sense?
It will make sense. And you might understand what sense I am seeing in what you're saying once you listen to this episode and you listen to the contributions of those who sat in your chair before you taking the seat on this bench of this podcast episode. Because magically, one guest is building on the other, and we're always coming back to this theme, which is fascinating, of the co-creation that a facilitator, as soon as they created the space and set the intention, kind of give away the facilitation towards the group.
Yeah, but I'm not even talking about the facilitation. I'm saying, like, there were some people who said in another session, I ran a workshop, and then at the end the workshop failed. I felt that the workshop failed, right? People expected me, they turned to me and they expected me to do something about this. No. So I sit here and I say, move me. No. Okay. It's your work. And so my understanding is that when you contract in agreement with someone to facilitate, the agreement is that I will be a chair. It is up to you to make the workshop run. It is up to you to have an intention. You're not a passive player, and I will not use you as a pawn to get into the goal of the workshop.
Yeah.
If it fails, it is you who define the failure, and it is you who could act on it.
Yes, it's the responsibility. And I think that's something that often participants forget, and where facilitators might be also too hard on themselves. Because as you said, it's not, is it the responsibility of a facilitator to create an experience? Because I think we cannot impact anyone's experience. And I had one podcast guest, she said, I'm not in charge of your experience. Your experience is not my business. And I found this very strong, but also very true, because we don't have any impact on an experience of someone else. We can create the environment, we can set the tone, the intention, but then it's an invitation, it's a chair.
Yeah.
Mm.
And like, I can share with you one other insight, just because you asked insights from the last year. Someone taught me a sentence that I adore. He said, stormy water doesn't reflect. And I will explain if you want.
That is yes.
Do you want me to explain, or do you get it? So what do you get? Yeah.
What I get is if your intention, so if it's stormy, the water doesn't, you cannot reflect, you can only see what's there when you're still, if you're calm. So you need first to calm your mind, calm your emotions in order to reflect back, and have basically a reasonable conversation, because a reasonable conversation needs reflection. But if you're stormy, you're agitated, there's no reflection of light in stormy water.
Yeah. And I love that. Like we talked about, as coaches, a big part of our work is to be a mirror. And if you are totally, I don't know, totally, if you have an agenda, if you are afraid of, if you want to, then it's very hard to be a mirror.
Yeah.
And it's an advice that was given to me when I was Tommy. So just, it's not like I'm talking out of infinite wisdom. I'm talking out of a really relevant place.
Thank you
So
so
that's
much for
another
sharing.
learning I can share with you.
Thank you for that, Dov. As always, inspiring.
And don't count on it. We'll see next time.
Yep, there will be a next.
Take care.
Elena, so happy to have you here on my experimental podcast bench.
Hello, I'm excited to be here. This is super fun.
Yeah, you're co-founder of Glimpse and you just had your Never Done Before demo session.
Yeah, that was super exciting. It was, compared to any other session I've done, it was crazy because everybody knew how to use software and video chat and mute themselves, and that just never is the case.
I think, yeah, that's what the community, they have definitely in common. So what did you learn? What was unexpected maybe?
Mm-hmm. So I think one thing that, and I don't know how much of this was because of, again, the pool of people attending versus how everybody normally uses Glimpse, but I learned that the first Pride 2, so we did a few rounds. I should maybe start with what Glimpse is. So Glimpse is like a speed matchmaking platform. It puts people into one-on-one conversations with a timer and then moves people between calls automatically. So as a host, I actually didn't have to do anything. I was kind of waiting in a group call if people had questions, but people would come in every now and then. And I learned that for the first few rounds, people didn't do anything except for talk. And that's great. That means people were just engaged in their conversations. And then maybe like 2 or 3 one-on-ones in, people started playing with the icebreakers and the photo booth and the mini games, which could mean a few different things. So it could mean people got tired of talking and they wanted a break and to have some kind of external engagement piece, or they got more familiar and comfortable with the platform and wanted to poke around. So maybe it's both, maybe it's one, maybe it's the other. So that's something I need to dive in more.
Did you ask the question, the debrief afterwards?
Yeah, we were talking about it. I think one thing, it was interesting because I think I should have facilitated the debrief a bit better because everybody was kind of like piling in their opinions, and there was a lot of enthusiasm. So that was part of it, I think. But people were kind of talking to each other about what features they used, and nobody, I don't think, used the connect feature, but everybody wanted a connect feature, which I thought was interesting.
What is the connect feature? Is that you can choose with whom you will be paired?
Sorry, you're right. That's a badly named feature. The connect feature lets you share your social profiles and like connect on like LinkedIn or something like that. And everybody was like, yes, I would have wanted to connect on LinkedIn, but nobody wanted to add their LinkedIn profile. So it was this interesting dynamic of we need to make it easier for people to connect because nobody wants to even type in their LinkedIn profile. So I don't know how we're going to solve that.
And maybe it's afterwards. So for instance, I would feel reluctant to change my LinkedIn profile beforehand because I don't know whom I'm going to meet. Whereas afterwards, I might be so enthusiastic because I had these wonderful connections. And then I regret, oh, shoot, I should have put my profile in.
That's a great point. So figuring out some kind of like after event, here's how you follow up and like engage with people.
Yeah. Interesting. And I'd be curious because I've been following Glimpse and I tried, I think one of the first beta tests, and then I got so excited. Oh, it's going to be part of the Zoom apps. And then we had a session to test the Zoom apps. And then I was like, okay, no. I do anything but Zoom apps. So as a founder, what is your experience and what is the workaround?
Amazing questions. So I guess some backstory here is also helpful. Flims right now runs in its browser, just in like any web browser. And we got the opportunity to join Zoom's beta for their app launch. And we're one of 55 companies that's able to build directly into the Zoom ecosystem. And when we first heard about this, we're like, amazing, we can give people the tool they're looking for, which is, automatic matching of people, and now put that on top of breakout rooms. So we don't have to keep dealing with terrible browser audio permissions, and it'll just work. Turns out it'll just work is a lot harder. It'll just work in theory. And I think it's been a few months of kind of like delays. That said, I do have, I am optimistic. I know the team that's working on it. We're in kind of direct contact with them, and we know how hard they're working, and they're aware of all the different UX problems. And it just is, Zoom is like quick moving and they're relatively small, but they are large enough to have bureaucracy. So there are things that they're working through, but I'm confident that they will get there, and they are still moving way faster than any of the other video chat conferencing platforms we've been talking to. So that, I think, I don't know if that's a good thing or not. That's more like all of the others are even slower.
Interesting, because, and maybe you can actually discuss with Cliff, who is the co-founder of Velo that we are using at the moment for the festival, because one thing that I'm really missing on Velo is the option to be allocated to breakout rooms automatically. Because Velo has this beauty of you have full freedom of moving around the space. But as soon as I'm telling a group, okay, now find a partner and go into breakouts, it becomes a total mess, because who's going to move first? How do you find a partner? And then it just takes so much time. So just throwing it out there.
Yeah, that could be interesting. This was my first time using Velo, and it's really fun. You can visualize everything, and you feel more of an attachment when you're choosing a place, rather than even a breakout room on Zoom, which is arbitrary. It's like, do you want to join room 1 or 2 or 3? Wow.
Yeah, and that's basically our design work that we did. How can we design a space so that it facilitates conversations of a certain type, assuming that sitting in a giant wheel, you would have a different conversation than sitting in a pool or sitting on a bench around the lake, right?
Yeah. It's all about like the positioning around, like, what does this, like, what feelings even does this space like invoke for you?
Yeah. And yeah, so Glimpse is basically the fruit or the silver lining of the pandemic, right? Because if I remember correctly, you planned something similar on site in college to connect your college peers, and then the pandemic hit and Glimpse was born. So now, 1.5 years in, what would you have liked to know before you started?
Oh, wow. So many things. I think a lot of the learnings, like, there's so many around like company stuff, but I think a lot of them are also just about like myself and my co-founder, and how we work together and what excites us. And realizing that like it's a marathon, I think took us longer than it should have, with like all the ups and downs. And I think for a while we were working like probably 18-hour days every day of the week, and you can't do that forever. And you especially can't do that forever if there's like, setbacks or frustration. You can do that when things are great. And I think that like I've learned a lot about, what is like burnout, just from like this last year, I think, because when you are doing what you love and everything's going well, you can work crazy hours and you won't ever get burnt out. But the moment it is not going well, you can't do that anymore, and you need to figure out work-life balance in a way. And this was the first year I ever felt that. And I like never felt that in school, never felt that growing up, because I was always able to find something that I was like loving and I could get obsessed with. But I think this yeah, so I think that's like the biggest thing I learned is like, what is burnout?
Wow. And in terms of all the testing that you did now with the platform, what did you learn about human connection and speed networking?
It's a lot more of like a contested space than I thought it would be in terms of people's impressions of, can you, like, just the concept of itself, like, can you form strong relationships in a few minutes? And is it just like a waste of your time at all? And I didn't realize how strongly people felt about this. I think was like one of the biggest things I learned, like whether or not people find value in the experience, I think is very like personal. And I think it's with like any other type of interaction, I think it worked for some people and not for others. What we've built isn't, you know, nobody can form like a really deep, you know, lifelong relationship out of 4 minutes. And that's not the point. The point is to spark a lot of interesting conversations so that you can be a better human filter for, you know, who do you want to engage with in the future? And the deeper we can make those initial minutes, the better. But I'd be foolish to say like, you're going to be best friends after 4 minutes. It's just supposed to be, is this someone you want to dedicate more time to, rather than kind of the arbitrary, hey, here's a 30-minute block on my Calendly. And then 10 minutes in, I'm like, there's no value in this. Let's hang up now. So it acts as like more of a human filter than anything else, which is interesting. I think like framing it like that has helped with a lot.
I know at least one person who would disagree with you.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm excited.
In a good way, I would
Okay.
say. So Patrick Cowden, he also hangs out somewhere here on the festival, on episode 124. And he really believes that you can form very strong connections in 3 to 4 minutes. And
I think you can, but I think most people aren't open to that.
yes. And this is what I'm really curious about. To what extent can we actually train that? And what if Glimpse wasn't just the filter? Okay, yes, with you I want to talk and with you I don't want to talk. But what if Glimpse was kind of going to the gym? How can I get better to form these very deep relationships, to have a potential friend? Maybe I don't need every conversation to be a friend. But what if with every time I go on Glimpse, I get just a little bit better on finding this kind of spark in the eye of a person, this very special touch in a human being in less and less time? Because somehow I think that every human being is interesting. You just need to find this one thing that makes their eyes shine.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I love the way you're phrasing this, and I want to partake in this framework. This is definitely how I see the world. Of like, I just like love talking to strangers. I love talking to people and figuring out what makes them spark and excited. Part of me doesn't believe that everybody is looking for that, and maybe that isn't a problem. Maybe that just means that it's a self-selected pool, and those that want to train in this like new kind of version of Glimpse, they can. I think I have to think about this more.
I would be very curious, because it makes me think of a research that I read where they put, it was the hypothesis was that although on our daily commute, back in the days when we were still daily commuting, people tend to prefer to sit by themselves in a train and not to interact with each other. Mm-hmm. Although interaction with each other significantly increases their well-being. So they had a few people they randomly selected a few people, and they basically forced them to talk to a stranger and to engage in a conversation. And almost everyone beforehand said, I don't think that they will enjoy it. I don't think that I would enjoy it. And almost everyone had a better time and felt better about themselves afterwards. And I wonder whether the same is true for these 4-minute engagements, that they're part of us that doesn't want, because engaging with a stranger always means interacting with a potentially different point of view, maybe someone who doesn't align with us, someone who questions our beliefs, who is uncomfortable. But when we do it, it feels so good.
Yes. Retweet. I think, how do you reduce like the social anxieties though that go into that, right? So we know it feels good, and I'd argue that probably like most people know it would be good for them, and most people know they would enjoy it once they take that leap of faith. Kind of like when someone's thinking of, you know, quitting their job to start a company. It's like most people know it'd be fun, but they don't want to take that first like leap of faith, and it takes somebody to push them. And how can we make it less of like a thing to leap into? Like, how do you like reduce that barrier to entry?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think that's indeed the biggest challenge. It's like going to the gym. Everyone knows that once we went there, we feel so much better. But going there, we find an excuse every single day.
Okay, so I guess one could look at what makes people go to the gym more, or what makes people work out more. And then you have things like gamification, like Fitbit, and other things that make you compete with your friends of like, who did more steps, or you go to a workout class. So can you apply some of those to like, hey, can you speak with a stranger? Can you make that a game? Like Pokemon Go, I believe, probably made a bunch of strangers friends, because like you would bump into each other, try to like, I never played it, but like hunting a Pokemon or something. So can you do something like that that just helps you meet strangers? And maybe meeting the strangers isn't the point of it, right? It's like a side effect, but that's actually the point of it.
Yeah, or like Duolingo. I mean, I'm learning Dutch with Duolingo, and I find myself totally stressed out. I need to do my Duolingo lesson. I need to learn Dutch. And recently, I actually got to speak with someone in Dutch, and I was surprised about my Dutch. I'm like, oh, I can speak the language. I didn't know that.
That's amazing.
I was only speaking with Duo. So, and then, yeah, imagine that someone would go on Glimpse and train that, and then suddenly they meet someone in real life, and they just became a better conversation partner. Yeah, and how to make it, I think one benefit is that it's so short, because it's 4 minutes, right?
Yeah. So reducing that barrier to entry has been like the goal there, right? It's like you're not committing to a lot. It's like 4 minutes. If it's a bad conversation, so what? Like you have an out. The screen is your protection mechanism, and that's about it. And that's super easy. It's funny because the first version of Glimpse like was actually built for like friend groups. So it's like an easy way of like catching up with all of your friends and hoping to like keep strengthening relationships. And that was our first thesis, was like, hey, if you like call all of your friends for like 2 minutes a day, you'll like sustain those relationships for longer than like if you try calling them all for an hour. And that theory, or that thesis, I guess, we decided to invalidate for a few reasons. But that's like where it came from. And then it was interesting to see kind of the natural progression, but it was no longer for like maintaining relationships and instead for like creating new ones.
And then, yeah, maybe there are kind of leaderboards that that after a conversation you rated how did you feel after the conversation with this human being, and then you can move up the leadership board. So can you have one conversation of 4 minutes per day, and then who is the best conversation partner?
I guess, okay, how do you rank a conversation?
I would say there are these, sometimes there's this energy in a conversation that I come out with more energy than I had before, and I feel better about myself than before. So, and I think that's about the other person who helps me find maybe new perspectives, becoming the best version of myself. And if I can help someone feeling great about themselves, I think this would make me a good conversation partner.
That is a great answer. Mhm.
Thank you.
So I guess, yeah. But yeah, I think that actually reminds me of like a conversation I just had with like a founder friend of like, you know, the dream kind of like co-founder relationship or, you know, team dynamic is one that gives you more energy, right? Like you want, like you were saying, like when you leave a conversation, you should leave like enthused and excited. And that should be like the number one proxy and like, you know, coworker compatibility, and kind of every kind of like interpersonal compatibility, I'd say.
Yeah, because there's this another study that says that people tend to feel better about themselves the more airtime they had. So, and we all know these people who tell us after a never-ending conversation, "Oh, that was such a great conversation." We're like, "I didn't say a word, dude." They might feel very good about themselves, but they leave the other person feeling miserable. So you wouldn't rate them high as a conversation partner. So I think, yeah, it is indeed a good proxy of how you walk out of a conversation with someone.
Okay, here's a question. So there's some Zoom apps that help you become better at talking by giving you metrics about the conversation. Like, oh, you've been talking a lot or monologuing on for like 2 minutes. Slow down or stop. What are your thoughts on these like tech integrations that help you become a better conversationalist?
Interesting. I didn't know about these Zoom integrations. I am intrigued. And I think it doesn't mean much actually, because there are charismatic people. You just want to hear them speak. Right? And it's great because there's something to say and they're engaging and they make you think. And then there are others who don't like to speak. So why would you punish them or give them a bad ranking just because maybe they need more time? And then you have, so for instance, I need to speak in order to think. So I just blabber and sometimes something smart comes out of my mouth and something not at all. And others need think to speak. So they first need a minute just for themselves and then something really smart comes out, but only one thing, right? For me, it's just an avalanche of words and you have to pick and choose. How smart is an app to really distinguish? So what's the quality of speech as opposed to quantity? But then on the other hand, there's whether we are using I statements or you statements. But then it depends on the context. So if I'm giving feedback or if I'm sharing something, I want to use I statements because who am I to judge you? But when I'm a leader and I'm talking to a team, I want to make you statements or us, we statements, because it's about us and it's not about me. So again, how can an algorithm really separate the context?
That's a great point. I haven't used them, but I think based on what you just said, the way I would probably build it wouldn't be with like, okay, like raw, like minutes spoken. So maybe it would tell you that, but you would be the one that interpret it. So it wouldn't tell you, here's what you do with this information. It would rather just give you the tool or give you the information, and then you get to decide whether or not it makes sense to kind of adjust what you're talking about.
Yeah. And I think what would be important, one is also body language. So actually, how much movement is there in the camera and how much interaction with the screen? Because I think this makes a huge difference. How do you use your voice? Because if you don't move your voice at all, then you can say very smart things and it's going to be very fantastic, but everyone is going to fall asleep. And then maybe you don't say so much, but if everyone just dies of boredom because there's no variation and there's no energy in your speech, right? This also makes a difference.
Yeah, totally. Interesting. Okay. This sounds like a fun thing to build. It with like a raw Zoom app, it's not possible because you can't like tap into like the actual tracks, but there might be something else, because I know people use like virtual cameras, like snap cameras. So if you could like, before it goes into Zoom, even just like get your local stream, that could be interesting.
Yeah.
And then you could do a bunch of stuff on like, hey, like you have to move more or do something. That'd be interesting.
Yeah. And I'm just waiting for the screen that has a camera right there. So not here, no there, right? Because I want to look at you.
Okay, the thing is, I used to have a laptop so my Mac has it up there, and then I used to have like a Dell that had it down there, but it's called a nose cam, and it's terrible because the angle just doesn't flatter anybody, and yeah, just none of the cameras work. You need like an external camera that like can like adjust and move around, kind of like the iPad. It like follows you around when you talk.
Oh, yeah. Wish to universe. Apple, Google, whoever listens to us. It's our order. Awesome. I think this was a great start, and I think we want to record a full episode to speak about all these things in more detail.
Yes, we should. This was fun.
Yay. Thank you so much for joining, Helena, and enjoy Never Done Before. I see you around.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye. Suzanne.
Hello, Miriam.
Thank you for joining me on the experimental podcast recording bench.
Yes, it's great to be here.
Yes. And let me ask you one thing. If you had to share one facilitation insight, what would it be? Something you learned today or last year or in general?
I think from today, it was really about the session that Manal and I did on silence. It was really amazing how the whole atmosphere changed in the room when they came back from the breakout session, being silent. You could really, wow, you could just feel it almost. It was so amazing to see the shift and to feel the shift between before sending them off to the breakout in silence and then when they came back. And you almost had to invite them again to speak, which was beautiful because you think it's so good to just be silent with each other, and so many things come up and appear. And I think that's my insight as well, at least that I had, to allow for more silent space.
So if I imagine it correctly, you send participants in your Never Done Before workshop into breakouts, and their only task was to be there together without speaking?
Basically, yes. They had, in a pairing exercise, they had to reflect on a question and kind of had some time to individually reflect, but still being with the other in the group, in the breakout, being silent. And then for a few minutes, they should silently share with each other whatever they had thought of before, when they were kind of silently taking notes or reflecting. The other one was that they had to collaborate together on a mural board, being silent together on a question, and they were only allowed to draw. So no words, no typing of adding sticky notes, but really to draw that answer to the question. And it was just beautiful to see the different energies when they came back. That was a true gift to myself and to Manal, that we were able to give ourselves today. Mm-hmm.
I can hear it in your voice, and I'm intrigued, and I'm looking forward to the repetition of the workshop in the Afterglow program. And why do you think is it that we don't use silence more often in our workshops?
I think sometimes, and I mean, I don't exclude myself. I think sometimes we don't feel that it maybe that's it, that it's appropriate for team members or for teams, maybe that it feels awkward, that it's and maybe also sometimes it's not a trusted space that the team members have developed yet. So I think it's with facilitators who have such an open mindset, I think they're easier to trust each other and to get into the space. And I think depending on the team, but I think you probably need to lean them in a little bit into the silent space, but it's definitely, I think, so much more worth exploring, and to just let them sit and think and share and experience whatever that is to share in silence.
Yeah. And I was just wondering whether it wouldn't be worth to test that assumption, because thinking of a team that doesn't have this trust, which maybe are facing some conflict, whether silence can actually help them to heal and to connect.
Yeah, and you're right. So maybe it's even better with them to just throw them into a room and say, all right, our objective for the next 15 minutes is to be with each other and to really be present with each other and to share whatever is on your mind through either being in the same room or being in the same digital space. Yeah, but it was a different vibe in that after that breakout. That was beautiful.
What was your expectation, and did you have any? And to what extent was it different?
I think I thought they would be more startled or irritated maybe, and all of them were welcoming that space really as a gift to themselves as well. And I didn't expect that much gratitude for the silent space, especially because we basically just did the debrief verbally in the plenary, but everything else was in silence. So any breakout was in silence. And I thought, that's probably going to cause some, I don't know, some upheaval or at least some irritation. And it didn't at all.
Very interesting. And especially, so I understand you're surprised because the context is a global festival where community members now have the opportunity to meet each other, and one would think that they're coming here to communicate. And somehow when I think communicate, I always think verbally communicate. And you're just showing that communication doesn't necessarily need words.
Yeah, true. And actually the other session that built basically nicely on that was the pickled session we did with Chris Bend, because he had asked us to draw emotions, to draw fear with the pickles. And so he really kind of went from the extreme negative side to the extreme positive side. And it was so interesting to see how just with, we just had a few seconds really to draw something, but with how dense the colors were, how heavy the colors were with fear or anger, or it's all around. You don't kind of do a bright orange or a bright yellow with fear or anger, and it was just interesting to see how that changed with the more you went to the positive side, and it was also, you don't really need that much conversation in talking to experience how that's really a common understanding of how that feels, that anger, and how it is expressed in a small little pickle drawing. That was amazing, and it beautifully built basically on our session as well.
Fascinating. Yeah, I can see that, and Chris shared a few of the pickles. It's really interesting. Nice.
Yes. Yeah, it is. I thought that as well. So it was like, oh, tick, 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 tick. So yeah, that was, those were I mean, there were so many beautiful sessions already. And it's just, I think really the generosity that we have as kind of agreements for the festival, I felt that being totally realized and shared. And yeah, there is no, I don't feel that there's any kind of reservation or hidden agenda or anything that contradicts generosity or respect or risk. I think it's really very open, and that's beautiful to see and to experience. It's a and of course to go beyond the norm, right, with boredom in a session, or the international global toilet day and how to get your shit out and all that association, where you think you can't do that probably with a regular session, or you would need to kind of shape it maybe differently, but it gives you so many good ideas to what is possible, and to step outside that norm in any way or form, which can only be beneficial. And it doesn't require 1,000 tools and blinking here and circling there. It's yeah, pretty basic sometimes, which is good.
Thank you for emphasizing that. Because I must say that's also something that I learned through the Never Done Before community, that very often the best workshops and those who bring forth the most insight and depth are actually those using a video conferencing tool and breakout sessions.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe something like pickles or a mural or a whiteboard to draw on, but yeah, not 5,000 tools where you need to switch, and you're more concerned in finding the link to the tool and understanding how it works instead of spending time with the question. So yeah, that's beautiful to see.
And what do you think is it that makes this possible? Is it that the right people are coming together, or that the space is providing the right mindset, or is it the context and framing?
I think it's probably a mix of all of that. And I think probably also a bit of, I think at least with some of the facilitators that I have seen, kind of a tiredness of using too many tools, of really kind of, I think that's what I've experienced in the beginning of the pandemic. We're so interested in all the cool tools that were out there, and it was great, right? I mean, every new tool was amazing. And they are, but some, I think, overdid it with kind of, oh yeah, let's take these 5 tools during a 1-hour workshop. And in the meantime, I think it's really kind of back to the basics, even to the analog hearts that you show into the camera, etc. And I think that seems to, it comes back to the human aspect somehow, it seems, and less the tool, more the people and the cause. And I think that's what I mean with the positive tiredness of too many tools running in parallel. And I think that's the openness that the Never Done Before Festival visitors have.
Wonderful. Thank you for putting it in such precise words and sharing your learnings. So generously.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's a great festival. Thanks to you for curating it, Miriam.
Thank you.
All
for
my love.
creating it, and thank you for whispering wisdom.
Yes.
Well, firstly, welcome to my emerging exploration podcast recording bench.
Hello, good to be here. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, we're just coming out of an intriguing session, and without naming, what was your learning?
So for me as a facilitator, personally, one of my learnings was I don't have to be responsible for everything that goes on in the room. And that when we are in a group, we are with the group, and it becomes a constellation, and therefore, you know, got all these different energy and connections. So that's one thing, and that the word I'm trying to say is, like, you can nudge, you can co-create, but I don't have to put everything firmly on my shoulders to have 100% responsibility for what actually comes out at the end of the session.
So where does for you the responsibility of the facilitator end, and where does it start?
Good question. I'll probably go the other way. So where it starts is in probably identifying or being part of, having a purpose, a clarity of why are we in the room together. I think that's important to name. And that can get created. I do think there's an element of that comes before you actually step into the virtual or the physical room. And that might come when you're talking to your stakeholder. If you're working with a stakeholder, or if you're doing it for yourself, I think we have to have an element of intention, or maybe that's the better word, intention versus purpose. And therefore, when you come into session, I think it's expressing that to people, like, this is the intention, or this is the why are we here. And then for me now, more and more, it's inviting people to share what they're seeking from their time with me in that moment, whether it's 90 minutes, 2 hours, a full day. Because by me understanding that, I'm like, okay, I've got way more ideas of where they'd like to get to by the end of the day. And if people are listening and they're like, yeah, but I'm a skills trainer and I'm there to do leadership training, and we've got an agenda to get through, I'd still say that's okay. And giving people that time to actually verbalize why they're there in the room is really useful, because then they make connection to it.
I think by inviting them to verbalize, you basically invite to share the responsibility to everything that happens after.
Yeah.
Because it almost sounds as if I am just guessing. It feels like preparing a dinner without having asked the guests whether they have allergies.
Yeah. Or do you have food preferences?
Or food preferences.
Vegan,
So I'm cooking and preparing all of that within this bubble of uncertainty. Although it could be just so easy to ask, and then knowing, okay, 90% are vegan.
And then you're screwed.
Maybe there is no steak tonight. And then suddenly we are sharing this, the selection of what's possible.
Yeah. And the other thing as well that I think I'm noticing more for myself is then naming and being explicit with the group that we're all responsible for the outcome of the day or the session. It's very easy, I think, and I've got no scientific research, that people come into learning sessions and they look to the trainer, they look to the facilitator, they then put that person in a position of mum, dad, teacher, good, bad, indifferent, so they constellate it and they put this responsibility on your shoulders. And some people love that. They'll go, oh yeah, this is me, look, I'm in the spotlight. Whereas I'm actually, no guys, we're not in the spotlight, we're there to enable others, to make easy. But sometimes we have to name it for the group. Don't expect just because they're intelligent adults that they get that they co-facilitate with you here, that they have a responsibility. Sometimes we need to be explicit in the implicit.
Yeah. Then I wonder whether, because this is something that I continuously point out as one of the USPs of Never Done Before, that we all learn without having a teacher present, and we are all facilitators, and there's one or two of us who contribute a workshop, but we're all facilitators.
And even so, I've contributed a workshop, but I am not stupid enough to go, I haven't learned myself during that time. I am both leading and learning, and that's what I mean when you're in a constellation, you're in that group. And I'd invite anyone listening to just notice how do they place themselves when they put on the hat of facilitator or trainer in relation to your group. Oh my God, that would be a great constellation.
One thing that came up for me in this workshop, and I have to process that, there is this intuition where usually I'm the first to send a group into breakout sessions, because I believe that there is so much value and we can go so deep. And somehow in this last workshop, breaking us up into smaller groups would have kind of broken the flow or spirit. And I wonder where this intuition comes in? How do you know?
Well,
And
when
maybe-
to go to a breakout, when to stay as group, when to
Maybe
reflect.
it's subjective. Maybe
I think it's a felt sense. It is for me anyway. And sometimes when I'm in the middle of those moments is pausing and sometimes just closing my eyes and taking a really deep breath and even asking my intuition, what do we now need, or what do we as a group now need? And listening, like listening in silence to my inner instinct.
listening to the silence of the group. I think that's possible also via Zoom.
Oh yeah.
We can sense what the group needs. It
Oh,
sounds woo-woo.
definitely.
I believe that.
But we need to slow down and sit in the silence for a moment to sense that, because I don't personally believe our brains can process it that quickly. I mean, that's why a lot of people have agendas, I'm guessing, is because they just go, right, point 1 done, point 2 done, right, go to this exercise, bounce to this bit, and that's fine, but that's where we then miss things, the energy, the depth.
What is really needed?
What is needed here? That's the question to ask. What is needed here now?
And the question, what do we avoid by checking off the agenda?
Yeah. And what does it give us? Because it'll give us something: security, comfort, knowledge I've met the client's expectations. Sorry, we're going totally in a different direction, but yeah, that's another reason why we use agendas, isn't it?
Illusion of control. Illusion of control.
What does that mean?
That ticking off agenda points makes us feel in control.
Sorry,
yes. Avoiding what the group actually needs. And then at the end, okay, I did my job. We agreed on this agenda. Yeah. We went through it on time. So job done.
And here's a question. How do we learn to do that as we are growing in our experiences as facilitators?
Learning or unlearning?
There's an element of both, because you've got to unlearn to relearn. So you've got to, because I think many of us probably would have said we started in that space of, I've got to get through this. I have to do what the client wants. I have to meet their expectations. Tick, 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 tick. And then we get into those situations and you're like.
And I think it is important to first learn it to then unlearn it later, because there is logic to the structure, and without having gone through the agenda and learning, experiencing how long every agenda point takes, if it runs smoothly, we can never let go.
Yeah.
And we can never sense, if we don't experience how it feels when we just go through it, we cannot sense when it's different.
Yeah. And we also need to probably go through, like the example you just gave, actually there might have been better for the group not to go through the agenda and do something different. But sometimes we have to go through the experience of going through the agenda and coming out the other end going, oh, what was that? Felt weird, or that wasn't what I was expecting, or oh my God, the conversation, or reactions of the room. And that in that moment, there's learning there as well.
Because it's so painful.
Oh my God.
We've all been there.
Ooh,
after
I'm having
a workshop day, that it's like, ooh, the group needed something else and I didn't have the courage, or I didn't listen, or I wasn't ready to deviate from my agenda, and then it just hurts. And the worst thing is if someone even tells you, and this experience you don't forget.
Yeah. I'm just that's made me go really shivery. Yeah.
Muscle memory.
The body never forgets, eh?
Yeah.
That's another conversation for another time.
Thank you so much, Kirsty.
Thank you, love.
Always wonderful to chat with you, and see you next time.
Yeah, thank you.